Today on Deadline TV, we've got Dan Moldea from Washington, D.C., who's a Hoffa expert who has written 10 books, and one of them being The Hoffa Wars, and that was the original version was in 1978, and you've had some updates on that as well. And we're going to talk about, Dan is pushing for the FBI. He'd like the FBI to do a dig. He believes, he's convinced that he knows where Jimmy Hoffa's body is buried. And so we'll get in. Dan, obviously we've seen so many in 2006. We've had,
that was righteous. 2006 was righteous, but go ahead.
Okay, we had one then. We had one in 2013 in Oakland Township.
That was Zarelli, right?
Zarelli, and you know, the FBI has been embarrassed. And I remember after 2013, someone said, "That's it. They can't be embarrassed anymore." No. So tell us what you got.
Since day one, since Hoffa appeared and it was announced. And I have seen all of these digs by the FBI, and I don't recall of a single dig that they did that wasn't righteous, that wasn't based on a legitimate timeline and a legitimate cast of characters. Oh. The 2006 dig to me was very exciting and still is. In fact, the one document that I'd like to get that I can't get my hands on is the affidavit which chronicled the probable cause for the search warrant for the 2006 dig. See, the key to the 2006 dig at Roland McMaster's farm was not what happened at the farm. It was what happened the night before. That was the meeting with Roland McMaster, Tony Provenzano, Stan Barr, the head of Gateway Transportation, and Don Wells.
Okay. And so was there some thought that, I read some thought that maybe Jimmy Hoffa had been there briefly, his body had been there briefly?
The FBI's position was that Hoffa, that they believed that Hoffa's body was there on that property.
And this is suburban Detroit. And
this was the FBI coming away from it after their 2-week dig, as you recall.
Right.
And where they tore down the barn and everything else. You know, I went there with Don Wells 3 years after the dig in 2009. And he was the guy who had been released from prison. And he had been given a polygraph test, and he said, you know, this is what happened. And again, his focus was what happened the night before. Right. With Tony Provenzano and Roland McMaster, who I believe were co-conspirators in this thing.
Okay. And just to go for the people who don't follow this as closely as you, and Tony Provenzano was a Teamster out of New Jersey, a mob guy with the Genovese crime family.
Right. Yeah. And as you know, it was viewed that the Hoffa case was a 3-act drama with different characters in each act. In Act 1, Hoffa expected to meet with Tony Provenzano and a guy you've written extensively about, Tony Giacalone.
Right.
And he also thought he was going to meet a guy named Lenny Schultz, who was a mob-connected businessman with Tony Giacalone. And Hoffa was picked up by, say, persons unknown. This is what was known at the beginning. He was driven into Act 2, where he was murdered. He was taken to a specific location, and he was murdered by person unknown. And then he was driven into Act 3, where his body was disposed of. 5 days after the murder, an inmate in Trenton State Penitentiary, Ralph Picardo, received a visit from one of the alleged co-conspirators, one of Tony Pro's guys, a guy named Steve Andretta. He was in Trenton State Penitentiary.
Sure.
And during that prison visitation, Steve Andretta started talking about how Hoffa had been handled, telling Picardo that Hoffa had been murdered in Detroit. He had been stuffed into a 55-gallon drum. He had been loaded onto a Gateway Transportation truck, and he was shipped to New Jersey. The FBI said, did Andretta tell you who killed Hoffa? He said, no, he didn't tell me that, but I know, in as much as Picardo was Tony Pro's driver for many years, that Sal Bergoglio, another one of Tony Pro's henchmen, had a contract to kill Hoffa in as early as late 1973, early 1974. And then the FBI said, when they took him back to New Jersey, did he say where they took him? And Picardo said, no, he didn't tell me where they took Hoffa after they took him to Jersey. But I know from being around these guys that when we whack somebody, they wind up in a 55-gallon drum, and they wind up at Brother Moscato's dump, which is in the middle of Jersey City. It's also known as.
That's where And that's where we are right now. Now you are convinced. Now, as other people were before, Zarelli in 2013, who was sort of the acting mob boss in Detroit, and then the sort of the underboss in Detroit, and people were convinced of that then. And the FBI has been embarrassed. And have you had any conversations with the FBI that you want them to go to this New Jersey dump and dig?
I want to take them there.
And why? And tell us, walk us through a little bit, like why you think you've met with the owners of the dump, and tell us what they told you.
I met with after Picardo's information. The FBI got a search warrant for Moscato's dump. But this is a huge area. It's sprawling, and it's a toxic waste dump. There's rats and wild dogs and quicksand and everything else there. It was not a pleasant place. Plus, this was in December of 1975. This was really the first real place where the FBI thought that Hoffa's body was buried. And which indicates that if my source is correct, then this is a vindication for the FBI. So they should be very enthusiastic about following through with this, because it's going to vindicate what they had been saying from the outset. I interviewed the alleged co-conspirators in the Hoffa case: Sal Bergoglio, the alleged killer of Jimmy Hoffa, his brother Gabe Bergoglio, Steve Andretta, who had the visitation with Ralph Picardo, and with Tom Andretta, his brother. I met all these guys at once. I was with Gabe and Sal, Steve, Tommy I talked to on the phone. And
why did they talk to you? Why do you think they talked to you?
Well, I called them because I had a legitimate concern. I thought that Roland McMaster was at the epicenter of this whole thing. He was a labor racketeer out of Detroit. And I was convinced from day one, when I was hired by NBC to come on to this case, and I was just a kid at the time. I was 25 years old. I was a graduate student at Kent State, but I had been investigating the Teamsters for about 8 months before Hoffa disappeared. I worked for a little newspaper, and I had a column. I did an 8-part series on the Teamsters, their pension fund, and the mafia. And then a guy named John Quitney, a great investigative reporter from the Wall Street Journal, called me, and he said he was doing a 3-part series, and he asked me to cooperate with him. And so I was honored to. So his series came out on July 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. There wasn't a lot of interest in it. And then the following week, July 30th, Hoffa disappears. Now everybody was interested in this stuff.
Right. Well, so tell me just in terms of, so you met with Frank Coppola and his father, Paul?
After I met with the Bergoglios and the Andrettas, we talked about the prison visitation with Picardo, and we talked about Brother Moscato's dump. They didn't mean anything to me, but I had them for 3.5 hours on tape. Then later on, in 2007, a reporter friend of mine here in Washington named David Korn and I were doing an investigation of a crooked judge down in Florida. And it turned out he was getting payoffs in the mafia. And the mob guy who was making the payoffs to him was Philip Brother Moscato, the owner of Brother Moscato's dump. So I told David, I said, I'm going to go try to interview this guy. And he's a soldier in the Vito Genovese crime family. And so I went up. He was very nice. And during our conversations, I mean, this guy I interviewed him from 2007 to 2014. And this guy was giving me information with the frequency that a kosher butcher sells pork chops. It was tough getting information, but he did give me information. He told me that in Act 1, it wasn't Chucky O'Brien, Hoffa's quote-unquote foster son, who drove Hoffa into Act 2. It was Vito Giacalone, Tony Giacalone's brother, who you wrote about last year. The killer was Sal Bergoglio, and that Hoffa's body was indeed in Moscato's dump in Jersey City. That's where it was buried. So he died years later, last year, in September of 2019. I met a guy named Frank Coppola, and his father was Paul Coppola Sr., Brother Moscato's partner at the PJP landfill. P. Philip, J. John Hanley, who was a political cutout, and P. Paul Coppola. Philip was the mob guy, John was the politician, and Paul ran the dump on a day-to-day basis. So Frank and I talked. It's a long story about how we got together, but he trusted me from the outset. He gave me the whole story in our first conversation. We had 6 more conversations after that, and I said, He never changed a detail. He never contradicted himself. I said, we've got to meet. So we met. And in New Jersey, he said he was going to the dump the next day. And
was this September 29th of 2019?
This is the night of September 28th. We're having dinner on September 28th. He says
see.
he said he hadn't been at the dump in about 20 years and he was thinking about going. And I said, motherfucker, you're taking me with you.
Right.
And so he took me with him, and it's a very difficult place to get into. And it's a little treacherous. And but I was shaken. But I had a camera in my hand. I had a body camera in my jacket here, and all the film turned out great. And he gave me a 45-minute tour of the area, culminating with, "Here is where my dad buried Hoffa."
Yeah, how did he know? How did you remember where? Was it?
Well, his father had two conversations about it. One was in like 1989. They were on the property, and he said, "Here's where I buried Jimmy Hoffa." And then on his deathbed in March of 2008. Paul Coppola Sr. Gave Frank Coppola the details about what happened. So I asked Frank to execute a sworn statement under oath, under a penalty of perjury, saying that this is what happened. So he gave me all the details of how it came about. And so basically it was they were at the dump, and it was raining, and a limousine showed up, and Moscato went out and talked to whoever it was in the limousine. He came back and he said to Paul, "Listen, you're going to have to handle this because I've got some things I've got to do tonight." And Paul was upset because Moscato was pointing in a direction that the place was constantly under police surveillance, and he was afraid that Moscato was giving away the location of where this was going to happen. So Phil Moscato left, and Moscato was out of the scene. He thought he knew where the body was going to be buried, but that night Paul decided to bury it someplace else where only he would know. And his son Frank worked there as a part-time worker. He was 17 years old. He was interested in cars, girls, and motorcycles, and all this stuff was going over his head. But he remembered before he left work that his father had gotten an excavator and had dug a 15-foot hole. And then later, when his father on his deathbed, he said that night when the body arrived, Hoffa's body was out out in the open. It was in a rigger position where the guys who brought him tried to put him feet first into the 55-gallon drum, but he didn't fit, so they tumbled him in head first. The drum was sealed. They left. Coppola, who had seen the body, picks it up with a front loader, takes it to the 15-foot hole, drops it in the hole, and then he takes 15 to 30 steel drums and drops them on top of it. So we're not just looking for a drum at the bottom of a 15-foot hole. We are looking for a sheet of metal. I think a kid with a metal detector at the beach looking for change in the sand can find this thing. Right. And so what we need to do is my team needs to either get there and do I want to give the FBI what they need for their probable cause to get their search warrant. I'm prepared to give them the tapes, two tapes of the interviews, of the tour of the dump, the camera in my hand, the body camera on my lapel. I'm prepared to give them my videotaped interviews with Frank, and I'm prepared to give them the sworn statement that Frank executed under a penalty of perjury. Right. And also, I would like to give them, this, if we could get this ground radar thing, that would be an extra, arrow in their quiver. And why do you,
first of all, when you talk about a team, explain that a drop, but also why do you want this so badly? What's the, is this just sort of the quest?
Frank, why did he want it? Why did he want it?
No, why do you want, why are you?
I've been doing this for 45 years.
So you just want to, you want to.
I mean, I've written books about other subjects.
Right.
But as I'm fond of saying, I am Ahab in the Hoffa case is my white whale. I need closure on this. And
have you talked to Have you talked to the FBI
I've
directly?
been doing, most of the FBI agents who are on this case were reading about this in their weekly readers when I was on the ground crawling on my hands and knees trying to find the body in the first place.
Right.
And so I need, I'm more than happy. I love the FBI and I want them to be successful on this. I want them to be vindicated, but I'm dealing with them through intermediaries, and we're trying to work out a meeting right now. But the meeting that's being set up right now, I almost feel like Hoffa going to the Red Fox.
Yeah.
And so there's a question of, what are the logistics of this? I'm willing to make all kinds of accommodations in the midst of this pandemic. But, if I'm going to go up to Jersey, I'm going to have some very specific, we're going to have to have some very specific understandings as to what's going to happen when I get up there.
Now,
I'm just not going to show up at some meeting.
The Detroit office is the head, the lead on this. Are they the ones who make that decision, or will they come out of headquarters?
Detroit, I have no idea whether they're going to make it or whether Washington's going to make it. I do know that Newark is very interested, and so, if somebody wants to talk to me, I'm more than happy to give them everything on a silver platter. I want to get rid of this stuff. I want to be done with it. I want to give it, and then hopefully they will see their way clear to do their affidavit, to get their search warrant, and they will go and deal with the situation.
Do you think that they're embarrassed? They're too worried about being embarrassed again?
I'm the biggest offender on this. I know this case as well as anybody, and again, I have never seen a dig that the FBI did that wasn't righteous. When you had in 2013, you talked about the Tony Zarelli dig. I mean, Tony Zarelli was the former boss of the Detroit Mafia. His father, Joe Zarelli, is like a saint among the mob in Detroit.
Right, sure.
And he was the boss at the time Hoffa disappeared. I mean, you assume that Tony Zarelli knew something.
Right.
And how could you not take that seriously? In 2006, when you had Don Wells saying, here's what happened the night before with Roland McMaster, whose brother-in-law was the head of Gateway Transportation, the same Gateway that Ralph Picardo said to Steve Andretta, told him that's how we shipped them back to Jersey. That was Roland McMaster in the midst of that. And then you got Scotty Bernstein doing this great story last year where he talks about Lenny Schultz had confided in one of his confidants that Hoffa was taken to his house where he was murdered, and then they turned the body over to Roland McMaster, who took care of disposing of it. I believe that Hoffa was picked up by Vito Giacalone and others in the car, that he was taken to Lenny Schultz's house, that he was murdered there, that he was then given to Roland McMaster. They took him to the farm, the 2006 site, where he was stuffed into a 55-gallon drum, loaded onto a Gateway transportation truck, and then shipped to Brother Moscato's stop in Jersey.
And how do you think he was killed? I mean, was he shot or strangled, or what was?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. They could have, laughed themselves to death. Vince Persani always thought that Hoffa was going to this meeting, had a heart attack. I'm sure you knew Vince Persani.
Yeah, I knew Vince, sure.
Great guy, at the Attorney General's office for the state. And he thought that Hoffa had a heart attack in the midst of the meeting. And then here's the mob, confronted with the fact they got a dead body on their hands. And so they decided just to get rid of it. But for years, I thought, when I was reading the Hoffa Wars back in between 75, 78, I was admonishing other journalists to say, you got to follow what Ralph Picardo says. And because, the guy who says Hoffa was murdered, stuffed in a 55-gallon drum Gateway truck and shipped to New Jersey. But then I didn't follow my own advice, because in my conclusion in the Hoffa Wars, I had a mafia guy named Chuck Romaldi out of Chicago got a hold of me, and he said, we're not going to ship a body to New Jersey. I mean, what's the point? I mean, we can do things like that. They could do things like that in Detroit. And so the Gateway terminal is right next to the Ford River Rouge plant in Dearborn. And so I had been told that Hoffa's body had been crushed and smelted. And so I believed that, and I wrote that, and I was wrong, that Hoffa body was taken to the Gateway terminal, stuffed into a 55-gallon drum, put into a car smasher, and that he was crushed and smelted there in Detroit.
I
Again, it was Scotto who set me straight on that.
back in 1985, a reporter, Gene Shabath, and I at the Detroit News did a 10-year anniversary, and one of the prevailing thoughts back then was that Hoffa's body was taken to an incinerator in Hamtramck. That was
sanitation. Yeah.
One of the things. Well, let me ask you: Have you spoken to Jimmy Hoffa Jr. at all about this?
Jimmy Hoffa Jr. and I were close friends for a while. We had when I first. After John Quitney and I, when John, who was the Wall Street Journal reporter who did the 3-part series the week before Hoffa disappeared, when it was announced that Hoffa had vanished, John called me and he said, "What do you think?" And we came to this very logical conclusion that Hoffa was alive and well, and at this hunting lodge up in Eagle River, Wisconsin. So we went on this wild goose chase looking for Hoffa. I got bit by a dog that night and everything else. And so John had to go back to the newsroom at the Wall Street Journal to take all the grief he was taking. I flew with my ticket. I flew to Detroit. I met River Levine at NBC News. He hired me on the spot. And on my first day of work, the guy I was told about was Roland McMaster and this goon squad that he had. NBC gave me a short fuse to prove something. They went in a different direction than I advised them to do. The thing wound up as a dead end in that. I did they sent me to New York. I did a television special for NBC, and then I left and I went back into freelance land, and I wrote a 15-page theory to the Detroit field office saying this is what I think happened to Jimmy Hoffa. And then I was visited twice by the FBI.
Right, I read that in your thing. Let me ask you, what's the odds?
I met Jimmy Hoffa Jr.
Okay.
And Hoffa Jr. was convinced that I had solved the violence at Hoffa's local before he disappeared, that it was Roland McMaster's goon squad that was running around shaking down trucking companies, but that it was also doing like a Hoffa watch from 1971 to 1975.
What if you were a betting man? What are the odds of the FBI digging up going to Jersey and doing a dig?
I don't know. There is some politics involved in this. And,
do you think the biggest impediment is the fear of embarrassment?
Again, my position is, I say let's do this quietly. Let's just do it quietly.
Uh-huh.
And we don't need a big band there, playing out the tunes while they're doing the digging. In fact, these guys, I would love to be there at the denouement. I would love to be there with a camera. And
we know those things are hard to keep quiet. Somebody in the Bureau, somebody has a source who's going to say they're doing a dig, and somebody gets a helicopter.
Yeah, it's very difficult to get to this place. It's not like you just drive up to it. It's very difficult to get in.
Right. This place. But some of the TV stations,
if you're a press people, you're going to have to. The FBI could set up a perimeter and stop anybody from coming in. And like I said, I would like to be there at the denouement. I don't know if that's possible, but if they want me to come to Jersey, I want to be able to take them to the spot. At least I have that moment, because I don't want to give them all this. I got 45 years of this thing. I couldn't care less about the money. I want the credit on this. After 45 years, there is no justice if I'm not there at this final moment. And so what I want is, I don't want to read about this in the New York Times after I give them everything on a silver platter. I want the credit on this. And so,
what does a dig cost? What do you think it costs the government to do a dig?
Well, I got to tell you, that's a very good question, because I was just looking at where it was. I was just looking at the pictures, the films just last night, and remember, this is it's about the size of a little league baseball field. It's about 60 times 4, and it is. You got 15 to 30 drums on top of the drum. These are chemical drums. Now the question is what kind of shape are those steel drums after 45 years?
Right.
Did they deteriorate? This could be a real environmental hazard here.
Right. It could be. It sounds like dangerous.
They're going to have to look like spacemen, when they're doing this dig in order to be safe.
Right.
Not to mention the hazards of the pandemic itself. So,
right.
I think asking about cost is a legitimate question, because this could get, this could be dangerous for the workmen who were tasked to do this.
Yeah, it's going to be crazy. I'll ask you one last quick thing to kind of wrap this up. But you met with, I think it was in 2007, with Robert DeNiro, who was doing
14.
14. I'm sorry. And you met with him and you talked to him about the movie that came out that they paint houses. And tell us just real kind of quickly what the conversation was like, and what was your impression of Robert DeNiro, who I'm a huge fan of as an actor.
Everybody's a fan of Robert DeNiro. What happened was there was a book called I Heard You Paint Houses, as you noted, and it came out in 2004. And it was being shepherded through the process by Fox News, a very fine reporter named Eric Shaw. And Eric, he really bought into the Sheeran did it thing. And so Eric asked me to be the naysayer and to sign sign an NDA and to read the book, and then to go on camera after the NDA was lifted and give him my opinion of the book. And I said, listen, this is an important thing that Frank Sheeran's talking.
And Frank Sheeran was a Teamster.
Frank Sheeran is the Irishman.
Yeah,
Actually his nickname was Big Irish. And so he, and I had interviewed Sheeran, and Sheeran had threatened to sue me because I was putting him in the trick bag with the Andretti's and he said, and his attorney sent me a letter. Sheeran wasn't even there that day. He was, and now he's owning it. He's saying I did it myself. He didn't. Sheeran did not kill Jimmy Hoffa. It was Sal Buguglio who killed Jimmy Hoffa.
Okay.
And so people were trying to put DeNiro and I together when they heard he was doing this film, and he announced it in 2008. But he's a busy guy. I mean, I'm ready to go right now, but he's a busy guy. But I hosted a dinner for authors here in Washington. I've done it for 30 years. And we meet at the Old Europe restaurant in Glover Park. And a friend of mine, author Gus Rousseau, who writes also about organized crime, very fine writer, he called me and he said he was bringing a special guest, that he was coming with DeNiro. Keep it quiet. And so I kept it very quiet. And all the authors are seeing Robert DeNiro in the room. And DeNiro could have been a nicer guy. He was friendly. He was signing autographs. I remember he had a mouthful of food and somebody come up and asked him for his autograph. He wasn't upset or anything. He just, signed the autograph, shook hands with the person. So then as the crowd diminished, as everyone started leaving, Gus arranged for DeNiro and I to go to a corner table and talk. And it started out friendly enough. And then we started talking about he described the Sheeran book as being, what really happened to Jimmy Hoffa. And I said, that's, if you believe that, you're getting conned. And he said, I'm not getting conned. And the conversation just sort of deteriorated from that. DeNiro, I'm sad to say, DeNiro and I did not part as friends. It was a very contentious conversation between. I talked to DeNiro the way.
Was it like Goodfellas? Like, hey, oh no, fuck it.
I talked to DeNiro the way he talks to people in the movies. And I had, if I had more time, I would have taken it. But I had, 20 minutes with this guy, and he was going to hear what I had to say about this, about Frank Sheeran and this bogus movie. But I saw the movie and I loved it. I thought it was great cinema, but bad history. It was Martin Scorsese's homage to JFK. Great cinema, bad history.
Right. Okay. Well, keep us posted. Keep us posted on how this thing comes along, how it evolves. If you get the dig. Sounds like there's a little bit of a challenge there for you, but I know you're a determined guy. Obviously, still on the case.
I am a determined man, one way or the other. We can't do the dig ourselves because we're breaking about 100 local, state, and federal laws by doing it ourselves.
Right. Sure.
And plus, it's daunting to get equipment in there, and very
it sounds like a lot of challenges there. Well, I want to wish you good luck. It's always great.
Allan, always a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise. Thanks again, Dan.
Thank you.
Okay.